Hello, everybody, and welcome to this revision of for the level 2 students at the Vaidya's Chess Hub. So this is with an intention to provide you with all the positions that you need to study. It is going to be quite a big video, so you can divide this video into several parts. Not that you have to do everything in just one sitting, so you can take breaks, but make sure that you study all the positions in this video, and then you can say that you will be ready to tackle the clearance tests that the hub shall conduct. So let's get started. The first thing that you need to study are a few openings. You got 5 openings to study at level 2. You have the first one, which is the Danish Gambit. So let's get started with this. White opens with e4, black plays e5, white plays d4, black should take, c3, d takes c3, that's a sacrifice of a pawn, bishop c4, c takes b2, and finally bishop takes b2. So you arrive at this position, and this is the Danish Gambit accepted. Let's go through the sequence one more time before I show you the moves. Rather the notation. So e4, e5, d4, e takes d4, c3, then you have d takes c3, bishop c4. Mind you, there is also a line where the white player will take on c3 and give only one pawn. That is also playable, but if you are trying the Danish Gambit, it's not Danish, by the way, it's Danish. Then you might as well give it a full try, so full attempt. Bishop c4, give the second pawn as well, and then bishop takes b2. Here, the plan is quite simple. White wants to get a quick attack. His bishops are active. His queen is going to come in the play very soon. The knights are ready to come to action, will castle soon. So it is with this intention that white gives away those initial pawns, and that's why you call it a gambit. So let me bring up the notation for you. This is what you must study. So you have e4, e5, d4, e takes d4, c3, d takes c3, bishop c4, c takes b2, bishop takes b2. I hope that was clear. Now, after this, we will move on to the next. In this particular one, you need to study it from the black's perspective, and I'll bring up the notation pretty soon for you. So white begins with e4 and black plays knight to f6. So this is the Alekhine defense, and one of the hyper modern openings. So e5, white will attack the knight. Knight will find itself on d5. Although it's not a permanent square, if c4 is played, knight b6. The main line is with d4 and then d6. And that is how the game should progress. Mind you, a typical query from an amateur will be, but it's not checkmate, so how is it over? It's not over. These are just the opening 3, 4, or maybe 5 moves, and that gets the game going. So you better learn the sequence and the name assigned to it. That way you would be slowly getting yourself familiar with all the different kinds of openings, n number of openings. Let's do it one more time before I bring up the notation for you. e4, knight to f6, attacking the pawn. So if white is very mechanical and tries to develop his knight, then of course you always have an opportunity to take the pawn on e4. Okay, so e5, knight d5, d4, and d6. And now I shall bring up the notation for you. This is what you have to by heart. Now, another thing is that you don't have to necessarily rely on by hearting stuff only. I said there are n number of openings, but then the focus should be on learning the pattern and the name assigned to it. That makes the chess discussion very easy. If you're going to talk to another chess player, you can say, okay, that it was the Alekhine defense, and my opponent played c4, so something like that. All right, so now let's proceed to the next one. We will now go and study another one for black from the black perspective. This is the d4 opening, and so it's the one that at your level you have to study is the Nimzo Indian defense. So you play the knight to f6, and then you have c4, then you play e6, and then knight to c3 and bishop b4. Okay, let's look at the sequence again. White will open d4, black plays knight to f6. The logic of knight to f6 is just to stop white from playing e4 the next move, because e4 d4, those are the central moves you want to play. So c4, e6, knight to c3, and bishop b4 to pin the knight. Of course, the game could go on. It's not a checkmate. It's not clear that black is simply winning, but it is a very commonly played opening even at the grandmaster level. So I'll bring up the notation for you now. This is how you play the Nimzo Indian defense. Of course, we will study much in depth in the middle game and the end game, but these are just the opening phases, about 3, 4, or as I said, maybe 5 moves. Now let us go and study the next one. And well, the next one you have it from the white perspective. Well, it is e4, e5, knight to f3, attacking the pawn, which is very common idea. And then instead of playing the typical knight c6, let's say the black player brings out the knight and in return attacks your pawn. This is known as the Petrov defense or the Russian defense. Russian defense is more common a name, but it is also known as Petrov defense, you should know. So white normally takes the pawn, d4 is also played, but knight takes e5, and then black plays d6, kicking the knight out, and the knight should retreat to f3. Well, it is a mistake to go with the knight into c4 and taking the square away from the bishop. That's where bishop belongs. So you got to be careful. Here is the notation for the Russian defense. It's a drawish kind of an opening. More often than not, the games end in a draw when the Russian defense is employed by black. So a lot of work has been done here. It's the favorite opening of the former world champion Vladimir Kramnik from Russia. Alright, so let us study one more opening that you have, and it is the Spanish. Very common indeed. White plays e4, black plays e5, knight f3. Remember, in the Russian, the sequence so far is the same, and knight c6. That is the 90% of the games, the beginner level, you have this position, and then bishop b5. The intention is to put pressure on this c6 knight and castle as soon as possible, play for the center. That is the general idea that white will employ. And well, let's bring up the notation for you here. So when I'm bringing the notation for you, you've got to really study and make sure that you know the name, know the opening moves if you are to clear your test. Alright, I think now it is time for us to move to now set of tactics and theoretic knowledge that you should have. So now take a look at this position. It's white to play here, and this is known as the smothered mate. I repeat, the smothered mate, the smothered checkmate. And the meaning of smothered, it means that the king cannot escape due to his very own pieces. So this concept is necessary for you to master. It's white to play here, and every time you get a position, from now on, the openings are done. From now on, we are going to study positions. It is okay for you to pause the video, try to find out the answer yourself, and then when you think you are ready, you can continue, resume the video. Okay, so I'm going to discuss the answer straight away with you. What happens here is white will start with a check. So it's queen d5 check, and black goes with this king to h8. That's a safe square. Mind you that black king could also come on the f8 square, but if the black king comes on f8, the idea is very simple, that it will be just checkmate. let's say that this is the new variation. Now queen f7 is just checkmate. With the support of the knight, it's game over. So black would not do that, and black will go to h8. And now the game will continue after white plays knight to f7 check. This move is forced. King to g8. And now it's a double check. So the knight will move and it will be a double check. So let's see what will happen. Knight to h6 check. Now how is it a double check? Well, the knight's giving a check, and because knight moved out of the way, now the queen is also checking the king. Here is something that you should know. In a double check, you have to move the king. So if you are in a double check, you have to move the king. You cannot take both the pieces on the same move. You cannot block both the checks in the same move. Also, you must remember that every double check is a discovered check. It's not the other way around. Remember this, every double check is a discovered check. So in this case, the knight moved and the queen started giving the check of her own. So the move for black is to go to h8 again. Let us discuss what happens if king goes to f8. We have discussed this. The idea is similar. Again, you have queen f7 mate. This time the knight supporting from the h6 square. So black would not do that. Black would go to h8 again. Of course, now the idea is a beautiful sacrifice. So you will play queen g8 check. Notice that the king cannot take the queen because of this beautiful knight support. So looks like it's easy for black to just take the queen with the rook. But notice what happens now. Now the king has been surrounded by his very own army. So pawns and the rook, and so it is now easy for us to deliver this checkmate. So look at how the king is trapped by his own pieces. Beautiful checkmate indeed. Aesthetic brilliance, and this is what the smothered checkmate is. So I want you to study this position. If there's any part of the video that you've missed, of course you can go back, replay, and then study the position. So remember that this position is of the smothered mate category and the sequence of moves. Let us go to the next one. Okay, we don't want to save the changes, of course. This is the second position in the smothered checkmate. So here again it is white to play. Again, I would not mind if you wish to pause the video. Actually, that is a better method. So white to play here. Black king has not castled, so he's going to pay a price for that. So let me reveal now the sequence. Queen a3 check. Now king will move to g8. Notice that if the king goes to e8, it's a similar idea. Again, queen e7 is checkmate. The knight support from c6. So it is checkmate. That's why after the first check, it's king g8 that you will see on the board. Now knight comes into the attack. Knight e7 check. The king has to come back to f8. And now remember the idea of double check. And double check is always a discovered check as well. So the knight is going to move out, check of its own. And then because the knight will move out of the way, you'll have the check with the queen as well. So knight g6 is a double check. Okay. Now again, the move black will make is going to g8. Of course, if again black goes to this square e8, then it's the same idea. Again, the knight's going to support, and this is checkmate. So king will go to g8, and again the beautiful queen sacrifice. I have no doubt that you remember the idea. So we have this queen sacrifice, which is queen to f8. So we're going to make that sacrifice. Again, you have to note that the king cannot take the queen. The king cannot take the queen because it's protected by this knight. So the rook will have to take as a force move. And now again you would notice how the king is surrounded by his own army. And that's why beautifully, knight will just hop onto this e7 square and deliver this checkmate. So smothered mate is a mate where the king is surrounded by his own pieces. Smothered means suffocation, unable to breathe, kind of a thing. Beautiful indeed. And let's proceed. Of course, we don't want to save anything. This is for your explanation purpose. Now we are moving to a section in the notes where you have to study king and rook versus king. I repeat, king and rook versus king. At any point of time, if you have missed any part of the explanation, you can always rewind, go back and listen. And it's not compulsory, I repeat, that you cover all the positions in one sitting. So anytime you just want to pause, you can resume it the next day. So take things slowly, because this we are moving to the next section. This is king and rook versus king, and it's white to play here. The idea is to get the opposition. The kings facing one another with square in between, odd number of squares in between them, 1, 3, 5. That's opposition. So here, take a look at the board. You want the white king to have the opposition. Of course, white king cannot jump 2 squares and just straight away go to f6. So king will move to e6. And now black king has to make a decision whether to go to e8 or whether to go to g8. Now if the black king comes on the e8 square, it's going to be opposition, as I told you already, with odd number of squares in between. 1, 3 and 5 squares in between them. So this is opposition, and white is going to checkmate black by playing rook b8. It is simply checkmate because these squares are taken by our king. So this is just checkmate. So black king would not want to get into the opposition. So the only way to, and notice that the rook has cut the king off. So there's no way that black king is going to come forward. So the only move black in this position has is king to f8. So let's get back to the starting position. And so now black will go to g8. Again, white should continue the idea. So king f6. Again, the black king, if he comes in the opposition, it will be checkmate. So black tries to escape. And now you can play king g6. Now black has nowhere to run. Black is out of squares. So black king has to come to g8. And this is again opposition. I just told you, remember? Now it is not uncommon for amateurs to go for rook g7 and they announce mate. That is not checkmate, because then king has got squares where he can flee. So that's not checkmate. You have to remember that if it is opposition, it's always rook checking the king on the same rank that mates, not on the same file. So rook b8 is checkmate. So the idea is to take opposition and then go for a checkmate. It's okay to go back and study this video if you missed some part of it. Next position, the position 2 in this same module, which is king and rook versus king. The idea, remember, is to get opposition, but also to cut off the king. Don't let the king escape. It's black to play in this position. I think that's the first time it's black to play. So black to play here. The first duty of the black rook is to cut the king off. So black will play rook f7 here. And now what the black rook has successfully done is cut the king off. The white king is not escaping anywhere. So white king pretty much has a forced move, king b8. And now the same idea, remember? Go for opposition. So go for the opposition. So king c6. And now white king, well, would not want to come in the opposition. If the white king takes opposition, then rook f8 will be checkmate. So the white king will try to escape and go to a8. And again, we will continue with the idea. So king b6. And now white king is running out of squares, so has to come in the opposition. Remember, this is called opposition. And now I'm asking you, I'll draw 2 arrows, one with the red and the other one in yellow. So which of the 2 colors you think delivers a checkmate? Of course, the red one. So it's a check on the same rank, not on the same file, remember, in this case. Alright, so let's proceed to the next position. This is the final position when it comes to this particular study in this video. Now, this will teach us what is known as a waiting move. So sometimes it's not always capture or checks or tactical moves. Sometimes it is just a patient waiting move that will get the work done for you. So in this position, the rook has made sure that the king cannot come on the f file, cannot escape on this side of the board, can't come there. So the king, by the way, it's already opposition. You would notice that. So that is fantastic. So all white has to do is just to move this rook anywhere onto the f file. Anywhere in the f file, the rook could move. So I'm going to just give it one square. And the black move is forced. He has to go to h8, and now rook f8 is just checkmate. Notice how our king has nicely taken the squares g7 and h7 away from the black king. Alright, let's go to the next one. We are now starting a new section, which is king and pawn versus king, or simple pawn endings. I repeat, it is also called simple pawn endings. Nothing complicated at your level. So simple pawn endings. Remember, when the pawn reaches the 8th rank, you can promote it to any piece of your choice. Normally people would promote to queen because queen has 9 points, correct? So the most valuable piece, and so queen. White to play here, and white would obviously promote the pawn to the queen, and it's a check. Black's move is forced. I'm sure you see that. So king h7, and what is this called? I just told you. Absolutely, it's called opposition. The word is opposition, and because it is opposition, you want to check mate in the next move, which is queen to h4, because notice that our king has nicely controlled g8, g7, g6 squares. So this is just checkmate. I repeat that you can always go back to any part that you have missed or you thought went too fast. You can go back, replay the video. Simple pawn endings and position second. This one is where all the moves are just forced. Absolutely, and arises so many times, this particular position. So king is already in the corner. The pawn is going to be escorted by the king until the pawn promotes, and it's going to be checkmate. So b7 is a check. Force move is king a7, and now the pawn will go to b8 and promote. Black move is forced, king a6, and now it is checkmate. I'd like to say that in this position, often the beginners, amateurs, I don't know why, but they will stop at queen b7 and think that it is checkmate. It is a check, but not checkmate. So here is a principle that you can remember. If you have the king's support, you must always target the square which is right in front of the king. I'll say it again. You must always keep your queen in front of the king if your king is supporting your queen. So in this case, it's queen b6. Put the queen, I repeat, put the queen in front of the king if your king is, of course, in support. So that is checkmate. Very important to remember. Let us study one more of this simple pawn endgame. And now this is where you have a forced sequence. It's a forced checkmate. There's nothing black can do. So let's get started. The white pawn is 2 squares away from glory, from becoming a queen. Obviously, the first move is b7. Now, black king has been cut off by the rook. So the move for black king is forced. It's king h7. Pawn will promote. And now again the black king's move is forced, because now not only has the rook cut the king, but queen has taken now the h8 square, so the king cannot go back to the h8 square. So king h6, and now because the rook has already cut off the king on the g file, let's bring the queen onto the h file, and this is just checkmate. Okay, the king has nowhere to go. Now we are moving to the tactical arena. So we are going to study tactics, and the first of those is discovered check or discovered attack. So this position can often arise if black is doing, the business of copying your moves. arises from the Russian defense often, this position. And in this position, it is white to play. So now you should notice that it's very important to notice such things, that your queen is in the same file as the opponent's king, so the knight can move and it will be a discovered check. Some part of it you've already studied when we discussed smothered mate, remember? So you can pause the video. I always say that. I encourage people to pause the video and try to come up with the answer on their own. You can pause the video to find out what is white's best move. If you had paused the video, I have no doubt that you came up with the right answer. So obviously knight c6 check. So it's if you're wondering how is this check, it's not the check by the knight, it's the check by the queen. Remember, it's a discovered check. The knight was on e5, knight moved to c6, and the queen started giving a check. Now, how is that beneficial for us? Because now the knight has started attacking the queen, and it also controls e7 square. So in this position, if black blocks this check with the bishop, we are going to take the queen. Of course, you can lose your knight because you've got a good trade here. You got 9 points and lost 3 points. That's okay. A knight for a queen any day. And if black blocks the check with the queen, do not take the queen with your queen. You have to take it with the knight. And then, of course, bishop takes. And now don't return the favor by taking the bishop with the queen. So often, players, they know the trap, they do it very well, and then they overdo it. So just wait. Now you've got the opponent's king. Keep your queen, and the game should be won easily by white, by proper, sensible play. Let's go to the next one. We are on to discovered check or discovered attack theme, and it is going to be mate in 2 in this position. Again, what is worth your attention is that this particular H file is very active. So you have your queen in the line where the opponent's king is. So what is going to be the discovered attack or discovered check in this case? King will go to g6 and only g6, because then black's move is forced. Black king will have to come to g8. And one more time I'm going to ask you now, what is this called? The opposition. Also remember, when I say opposition, there's always odd number of squares between them. 1, 3, 5. It cannot be more than 5. The odd numbers. So now that you have the opposition, if you remember, it should be checkmate, because if you have the queen and the rook, that's what you intend to do. So queen will now go across the board onto this b8 square to deliver checkmate. Notice that our king has successfully taken these 3 squares, and it is checkmate. We will carry on the discussion on tactics, but now we will study the Skeever. S-K-E-W-E-R, Skeever. What is a Skeever? Mind you, when you have to study all this, you can actually set up the board and then actually practice playing these moves that I've discussed in the video. So actually have a board with you. It always helps. This is the 2-dimensional, the 2D thing. You can always actually put up a board and study, because you have to play in the tournament over the board. That is very important. You understand that. In such positions, you must notice it's right to play, of course, that the king and the queen are on the same diagonal. So if they are on the same diagonal, which piece can help you on a diagonal? The queen or the bishop? In this case, we have our bishop. So I have no doubt that you spotted the move, and the move is bishop e4 check. Notice how the bishop is going to make the king move out of the way, and let's say after king b5, bishop can just take the queen, and with the help of these pawns, white should be able to convert this advantage into victory. Again, an example of Skeever, but this time it is black to play, so flip the board. Black to play here. Black has to play accurately. Remember, the material wise, white is a 2 pawns up here. So black has got a tremendous idea. The idea is Skeever, of course, but how does he execute it? You can pause the video as always. The idea is to give queen h1 check and bring the white king onto the second rank. So let's try to execute this. So queen h1 check, king f2, and now notice that they are on the same rank, so you can just give queen h2 check, make the king move out of the way, and then you can take the white queen. This should be easily winning. You can mop up these pawns, and with the help of the king you can checkmate. The next position, it's back to white to play, and in this position black has just managed to queen, so the pawn got promoted. Black's last move was h1 equal to queen. Again, looks like king and queen draw. Don't be hasty. What you should again notice is that they are on the same diagonal, and you have your queen to exploit that. So the question is this green check better? Is this yellow check better? Or is this red check better? What do you think? Of course, I'm proud of you. The yellow one, of course, yes. So queen to a8 check. Because notice that the king will move out of the way, and after king moves anywhere, let's say king d3, white can just take the black queen and should be easy victory for white. Continuing the discussion on tactics, we will change now from skeever to the pins. What is a pin? Pin means that the piece cannot move because it will be illegal if it is absolute pin, and if it's a relative pin, you are going to lose heavy material. So let's start with this particular example. Here, this pawn on c7 that you see is pinned. It's pinned because the bishop, if the pawn moves, this bishop on g3 is going to give check to the black king. So this black pawn on c7 is said to be pinned. And because it's king, it's pinned to the king, you're going to say that it is absolutely pinned. There's no way that the pawn can move. It's an illegal move. Now that means if this pawn cannot move, the pawn actually is not supporting this b6 pawn because the pawn cannot move. And white is going to utilize that factor, and the winning move here is queen takes b6 check. Notice that this pawn is pinned by the bishop, so this pawn cannot take our queen, and it's a check. So black king is forced to go to h8, and now using this knight support, we're going to play queen a7 checkmate. How beautiful that was, is it not? Pin. You got to watch out for such tactics. This one is black to play, so I have flipped the board again. And, well, it's a checkmate sequence. White's king actually looks safe here. Look at the white king. It looks super safe here. There are pawns that are going to shield him. There's his own rook here. For the moment, white king certainly looks safe, but looks can be deceptive. Also true on chessboard. So there's a brilliant sacrifice to start. Again, if you want to pause, you can pause. I'll continue the discussion. So the black queen here will sacrifice on f2. So it's the queen f2 check. Queen takes f2 check. Now the king cannot take the queen, remember, because of the support of this rook here. So that's not possible. And rook can take. Of course the rook will take. But if the king decides just to go to h1, then rook takes f1 is just checkmate. So that is not a bright idea. So rook takes always is what you will get. You want to continue with rook b1 check. Now the king has nowhere to go, but is it a smothered mate? No. First of all, it's not mate, and second of all, there are squares where there are no friendly pieces. So you have got f1 which is vacant, h1 which is vacant. The only move white has in this position is that the rook will block. And now the rook move from f2, you can bring your bishop in action. So this is a check by the bishop. Now notice that the rook cannot come forward because the rook is absolutely pinned here by our rook. So now the king has to go to h1. That means that the rook is hanging, it's not supported, and rook f1 will be checkmate. It's a beautiful position. Again, I will say that if it went too fast, you can always replay the video and enjoy. So in this position, it is white to play, and this is actually a combination of a pin and a fork. I'm going to study forks, but this is a very nice combination of a pin and a fork. It's white to play here, and white immediately noticed that the queen and the king are on the same diagonal. But if you want to play bishop to c4, we don't have any support for that. But we don't need the support because, as I said, it's a combination of a pin and a fork. So let's see what happened in the game. Bishop c4, it's a pin, so queen cannot move anywhere because it's pinned to the king. Remember, absolute pin. The queen took the bishop because it was hanging, obviously. And now the fork. So obviously, knight e5 check, and white will pick up the queen. So knight e5 check, king e8, and knight takes c4. That's a beautiful combination of a pin, and combine that with a fork. You get a deadly combination. Absolutely brilliant. If you had paused the video, I'm sure you saw that. We will now shift our focus to back rank mates. Very important this, okay? Back rank mates are very common at all levels I'm saying. And the idea is that often the king is trapped after castling. There are pawns in front of the king, and the king is trapped often on its last rank, our 8th rank. So what happens here? It's made in 2. Obviously, rook takes e8 is a check. Black will take with the rook, and white will just continue with rook takes e8, which is a checkmate. Notice that the pawns don't let the king escape. It's not a smothered mate. Remember, there are no pieces on f8 and h8. It's a checkmate nonetheless. It's a back rank weakness. Let's move to another example of a back rank weakness. Here, the knight is also, let's say, call it an overloaded piece. The knight has to protect the rook, and the knight also has to control this f8 square because our rook intends to come to f8 anyway. And that's why we are going to exploit this by sacrificing our queen. So this is another important lesson for the beginners. They so don't want to give the queen. Yes, it is right. You have to protect your queen. Queen is a valuable piece. But if you are getting a checkmate, that is the only time when you have to sacrifice the queen. If you are going to get a checkmate in return, then it is okay to sacrifice the queen. Twice in this lecture we have seen that. Remember, there was a queen thrice, in fact. We saw that in the smothered mate. We saw that in that example where queen sacrificed herself on f2, and now this one, queen takes b8 check. Of course, black, if he plays queen c8, well, the queen is hanging. White will just take the queen. So knight takes b8, and now the knight was important on this particular square on d7, was there to protect f8. So rook f8 will be checkmate. As I have already mentioned, if the queen blocks the check, it's of no use because the queen will take, and now a knight has to block it, and you either take it with the queen, you take it with the rook, doesn't matter, it is going to be checkmate. Okay, now moving on to the last section of this lecture on tactics, or rather last section for the level 2 revision, is the fork. So very easy positions to finish it. The knight, it's black to play here. The knight has a beautiful fork to deliver, and after that white will emerge a piece up and should convert this advantage into a victory. So knight d6 check, attacking the king and the queen at the same time. So there's the definition of the fork. Fork means when a piece attacks 2 or more pieces at the same time. So obviously white is in check. Let's say the king moves to d7, knight takes, and that's it. Okay. Well, over here, one thing is to be noted is that the position seems to be in a mirror image. because otherwise what's going to happen is that the pawns could easily promote themselves to the 8th rank. So this is a mirror image. Just keep in mind that the fork is an important idea. Anyway, now in this particular situation, I'm going to take you through a game. We are going to club the idea of trying the center game or the Danish Gambit right at the start of the video and end it with a fork. So what's going to happen is e4, black will play. You need the notation here, so I'm bringing up the notation here. So e4, e5, white would want to try the Danish, and let's say black, you would see this is a tendency. Black normally, of course, he should take it. Black should take it, but normally they don't nowadays. So if black plays f6, it's a blunder. It is a blunder. So how you're going to exploit that is d takes e5, f takes e5, and one thing good players will tell you is never to expose this diagonal. It's dangerous, it's lethal. So now queen h5 check, and black blocks the check with the pawn. It is here that you get your fork idea. So you can pause the video if you want to find it out yourself. And if you had paused, I'm sure that you saw this. Queen takes e5. It's a check, and we are going to win the rook on h8. So these ideas are very common, and all the best for your study. Hope that you have actually got a lot of knowledge, and this should make your level 2 revision pretty interesting, and at the same time it will be thorough. So if you know all of these positions, you are ready to tackle the clearance test that the hub shall conduct soon. So all the best. Until next time, bye bye.